Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Letterboxing with Commentating Nerd. And this week, you guys get to see what I had for my first helpings of Hitchcock for this November film project. So we got a lot to talk about today. So we have my first course of hefty helpings of Hitchcock to go through. I watched 4 different Hitchcock movies from the 13 that I chose to watch for the next 3 weeks this month. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but if you guys remember me explaining the last couple weeks, basically I put together uh, my own sort of essential Hitchcock movies, like what are the 20 to 25 Hitchcock movies that I should try to see to say that I've watched all the Hitchcock that's worth seeing. Now, obviously, some people would say, "Well, watch all of it," but Hitchcock has a huge filmography, and that is just too much. So I kind of like tried to create a list first to prioritize what of his filmography to really focus on, and then for this project, I picked out 13 to watch. From that list, which knocks out most of what I have left of the things I haven't seen on that list, but it's um, still a good amount of movies. But also, uh, even though I'm making the What's New segment shorter, there obviously was a huge new release this past weekend with Black Panther Wakanda Forever. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And I also watched another new release movie on Apple TV Plus called Causeway, starring Jennifer Lawrence, that I want to talk to you guys about too briefly. So let's actually start off with what's new today. So for what's new, let's start off by talking about Causeway first. Causeway is from director Lila Neubauer, and like I said, starring Jennifer Lawrence. And really, David Tyree Henry is a supporting actor. It's definitely Jennifer Lawrence's movie, but he is in a lot of the movie. So in some ways, they're sort of co-leads, but Jennifer Lawrence. This is definitely Jennifer Lawrence's movie, so it's fair to say that she's the lead and he's supporting. Um, Basically, this is the story of Jennifer Lawrence's character. She is a army um, veteran who is wounded with a traumatic brain injury after a um, running over an IED in Afghanistan. So she's back, and we get thrown right into the beginning of her rehab, basically her body has to be retaught how to move, and her brain how to make connections and remember things. And you can just see how painstaking that process is. But also, she's dealing with a lot of trauma, both physically and also emotionally, because a lot of this um, recovery time she has to do back at home, where she has a lot of baggage from when she's a child, and she keeps wanting to go back to the military because that was sort of her escape from her childhood. So she's kind of fighting a few different traumas, and then the story is her kind of meeting David Tyree Henry's character, who also is suffering from his own sort of both physical and emotional trauma, grief that he's dealing with. And it's basically just them kind of finding each other and really almost helping each other to heal and understanding where they have bullshit and they're in denial or not really taking full responsibility of their own actions, those sorts of things. But what I love most about Causeway is it's so real. It's such a real movie. Um, it's it doesn't try to over embellish anything. It feels like a real life sort of situation that Jennifer Lawrence's character is actually, you know, in an injured army veteran that has to go through this recovery process, and David Tyree Henry feels like a regular person that went through what he went through, and seems like a real normal relationship, friendship, not the kind of like Hollywood eyes kind of relationships that we get, but a real one that is a little messy at times, and um, that's cool too. But so I really enjoyed Causeway. Um, I really love Jennifer Lawrence returning back to a very grounded, a darker drama. Um, that seems to be her best thing. It's back in kind of her Winter's Bone level. It doesn't get quite nearly as dark in this movie, but it's still her kind of like tapping into a much smaller movie where she has a lot to do, and but it's a little bit more of an understated performance as well. It does have a lot of similarities to Silver Linings Playbook too, with like different characters dealing with their own kind of emotional and physical baggage together. But of course, Jennifer Lawrence's character is very heightened performance in that movie, very unhinged and heightened performance. Whereas in this one, it's definitely kind of the reverse take, where it's much more of a subdued, sedate, a little bit more sedate performance. But she's still definitely going through as much pain as her character in Silver Linings, just differently. All right, so I give Causeway 4 stars out of 5, and it jumps into my top 20 for the year. I really like this movie. I've always been a Jennifer Lawrence fan. Even in movies I don't like, she's usually really good in them. It's good to see her trying to make a comeback here. She kind of went away for a couple of years, and I'm happy to see her back in her wheelhouse. All right, but you guys don't really care as much about what I think about Causeway and probably haven't seen it, but you probably have seen Black Panther Wakanda Forever or plan to see it. So let's talk about that movie. This is the next addition to the ever growing MCU. Black Panther, of course, with Ryan Coogler had this amazing cast of Wakanda from Wakanda from the previous Black Panther movie had an impossible task to make this movie after the passing of Chadwick Boseman, losing their T'Challa and their friend, and they had to figure out how to regroup, rewrite, and make a movie that was worthy of the first one and Wakanda because it's one of the better settings and um, kind of it's it's a movie that deserves a better sequel, a really good sequel, and um, honestly, I think Wakanda Forever delivers amazingly, way better than they ever like deserved to. Like it seems they definitely achieved the impossible with this. Certainly, Ryan Coogler couldn't do this without his amazing cast: Letitia Wright, Denai Guerrera, Angela Bassett, Lupita Nyong'o and Winston Duke all really put on really great performances. Plus, we get the new character of Riri Williams, played by Dominique Thorne. All of these people are doing a really good job. And then we also have newcomer of Tenoch Huerta playing Namor, the antagonist for this movie. Um, I really enjoy this movie for a few reasons. One, um, this movie absolutely had to be a memorial of some kind to both Chadwick Boseman, the actor, the person, but also T'Challa and Black Panther, the character within the MCU. And they bookended they bookended the movie with grieving that loss, and they do it beautifully. And it's going to bring you to tears, or at least give you goosebumps, or it's going to leave you with feels when you go see this, or if you have already seen this. And I think they do it the best way they possibly could have. I wouldn't have changed them the way they did it anyway. I think it was really the perfect way to do it. Um, the other thing I really love about this movie is I was sort of expecting that this movie would sort of play it safe and use its amazing cast of many to kind of spread the wealth as far as who really gets focus in this movie and not actually settle on who their face for the future is. But this movie, some of that is true because there's a lot of people who get showcases in this movie, but they definitely pick out who their face for the future is going to be. I thought that maybe, obviously somebody would be Black Panther by the end, but I felt like this person, like whoever they chose, wouldn't necessarily be like the most important Wakanda figure necessarily, and that they would all kind of share that load. But they really gave it to this one person, and it was their story all the way through. and it was a really fulfilling story, at least for me, and I really appreciated them really making a gutsy move and like committing to it instead of kind of wavering and kind of like hedging their bets, which is what I thought they did, and I really appreciate the movie for that. A couple other things I wanted to note. Just like the first movie, the production design is amazing. The visual effects is really good, particularly the visual effects that go along with the cinematography and kind of the production design, because so much of Wakanda and the backgrounds and whatever are, computer animated. So you have to factor that in. There are some wonky VFX in the first Black Panther movie, but not in certain scenes and certain kind of perspectives. But then Ludwig Göransson returns as composer for the Black Panther movies, and he completely knocks this out of a park. If you thought the first Black Panther score was impeccable, because it is, there's really, it's definitely top two MCU. There's not much arguing about that. This one is not maybe not quite as good, just because it does kind of work off the back of the original score from Black Panther, but he adds so much amazing music to this. There's so many great vocalists who contribute. I'm not as big of a fan of how many songs were written. Like I don't know, like Rihanna has a couple written songs for this movie that like it's nothing against her, because their songs are actually really good, but I much preferred kind of the songs, the vocals that were worked into the score, that better worked into the score previously, as opposed to kind of like these standalone songs that play over uh, the movie. So that's what I have to say about those things. And I do actually want to talk about a little bit of spoilers, because this movie is hard to talk about without spoilers. So I can talk a little bit more about Namor, and a little bit about kind of what I was alluding to as far as who they chose to move forward with the future of Wakanda, basically. So here's my little spoiler tag. When this goes away, then I'm not talking about spoilers anymore. So if you don't want to hear spoilers, you can kind of put the video on mute, or skip ahead to where it doesn't have the spoiler tag anymore. So I want to talk about who they chose to be Black Panther, and really who was the center of this movie. Um, Angela Bassett does get a huge showcase in especially the first act of this movie. However, this movie is Shuri's beginning, middle, and end. Um, they open with her trying to save her brother. They continue following her grief, lots of people's grief for sure, but they really focus in on how she's grieving and how it affects her connection with like the ancestral plane, her spiritual side. She really leans back more on her science and like kind of how that develops. But then also she needs to also develop as a leader. Her brother's gone, and she has to be one of the royalty kind of whatever who is willing to take on diplomatic duties more than just being the scientist in the lab. And it's so much about her character growth in that, both dealing with T'Challa's death, but also just taking on new responsibilities and becoming, by the end of the movie, the new Black Panther. And even as she becomes the new Black Panther, that has, I don't want to give you spoilers about that, but I really like how they made her transformation into Black Panther more complex. And they really didn't make it this super easy, like, oh, she's just the new Black Panther, but she had her own special twist and unique kind of like journey within that. That was really great. As far as Namor goes and the Tolucan people, I might have said that wrong, and I'm sorry if I did, but basically Namor's people, this kind of new ocean underwater civilization that nobody's ever heard of or seen before, they kind of come to the forefront, and I just really love how they connect Wakanda and Namor's people, because they both really have the same sort of problem with the outside world. They try to isolate themselves and protect their technology, their culture, their civilization from the rest of the world because they are afraid of what they'll do. And that was a big focus of Black Panther 1 of you know, whether they should open their borders and uh, contribute to the rest of the world. Wakanda did, and then so they're dealing with repercussions of that and the fallout from Endgame and all sorts of things like that. But basically, Wakanda is getting a lot of flack from the rest of the world now that they know they have resources that everybody wants, and that creates a lot of geopolitical problems. And there's a lot Wakanda has to put up with, but then also it seems to be affecting another civilization. And then they come into conflict because they almost have to have this secretive war so that they can somewhat protect both each other's interests. It's really interesting how they kind of work it, but I really like that part of the movie as well. Yeah, so those are my spoilers. Um, Talking a little bit more about some negatives of the movie, I guess there is just some extra storylines that don't work quite as well. I feel like maybe there's some extra stuff, but none of it bothered me too badly. Riri Williams, I really loved her team up um, at the very beginning when she's first introduced. She has a great team up with a couple of our main characters, and that kind of that whole sequence is really amazing. I do feel like she has less to do the rest of the movie other than serving this very story specific role, I guess. But she doesn't have a huge contribution to at least the back half of the movie. But then also, like, they do have to connect Everett Ross a little bit, and they try to work him in, and kind of like we see the changing landscape of the U.S. and their government and how they kind of their diplomacy with Wakanda and the rest of the world. So we do get a little bit of an insight into that, and Val makes an appearance in this movie. She's apparently a more important government person now. So that's a thing in this movie. And thankfully, she's not quite as cartoony as she has been in her previous things. She does feel out of place in this movie, and I still don't really like that character. And I don't know what they're going to do with it. But at least in this movie, it was a little bit of a sideshow, but it wasn't nearly as like ridiculous a sideshow as it would have been if she was acting like she was in her previous appearances in the MCU. So that's my thoughts on Wakanda Forever. That was a little longer than I meant to, but this is a big movie, so I just wanted to give it its due a little bit. I give this 4 stars out of 5 and give it a like. And actually, I'm going to actually talk a little bit about my MCU rankings here as well. So I'm going to share those with you. I haven't actually gotten to share them with you yet. So I need to change my description because there's no longer 23 MCU movies. So this is my Marvelous MCU Merit Manifest. At one point, this was only MCU movies, but fairly recently, I incorporated the shows in there. But I'll try to kind of talk about my rankings without factoring the shows for the moment. Just kind of like read between the lines a little bit here. Avengers Infinity War is my favorite movie within the MCU, and you see Guardians Galaxy in this next, and then the original Avengers. I had the first Black Panther at number 10, which actually, if I took out the shows, it would be number 8 for just the movies. Um, Talking about Phase 4, No Way Home is my 4th favorite MCU movie, which makes it my favorite Phase 4 movie. And then Black Widow, I just have a really soft spot for Black Widow. So that's my number 9 MCU movie. I think I'm doing that right. Doing the conversion right. um, but I just really love that character. I really love the addition of Yelena in that movie, and I have a soft spot for that movie. It's maybe not as well made as some of the other ones that are behind it, but it's just one of the ones in the MCU that I really enjoy, even though other people might have it lower. And then Wakanda Forever is here at 14 on this list, so -2, that would make it number 12, the 12th highest, my 12th highest ranked movie. There we go. Now I said it. So I really appreciated the monumental task that they had to do, and I think they nailed it. There are some weaknesses to the movie, but you know, there could have been this could have been a much messier movie than it was. It had some great things to it. That I really enjoyed. So that's my third favorite Phase 4 movie and my 12th favorite MCU movie. There's a lot to like there. So that's where Black Panther Wakanda Forever lands. And then let's go to my 2022 movies since we're talking about what's new and new releases. I watched both Causeway and Black Panther. So uh, Black Panther Wakanda Forever comes in at my number 16 spot behind Fresh and in front of Bros, and then Causeway is right just a little bit further behind, not quite above Bros, but above Nope and Chippendale Rescue Rangers. Yeah, I already talked about why I liked it, so that's where those are. So those are my updated rankings for 2022. Okay, now that we got what's new out of the way, we can move on to the main event, and we could get on to the first course of Hefty Helpings of Hitchcock. As I discussed before, I have this list of, I actually trimmed it to 24, so I'm going to share with you guys that list as well. As I discussed before, I created my most essential Hitchcock hierarchy list, basically kind of from different rankings around the internet, from different publications. I kind of just figured out what like the top 24 basically were. These were the ones I felt like were most worthy of me trying to see all of at some point in time. By the end of this project, I won't quite see all of them, but I'll see a grand majority of them. I'll see 13 more than I had before, which I had only seen 5.5 before this. So I've seen Psycho, Rear Window, North by Northwest, Vertigo, and The Birds, and then I've seen the half is To Catch a Thief, which I watched technically the whole thing, but I don't remember very much about it because I was very distracted while watching it, and it was kind of like a half watching sort of thing, and I really had to do it justice and watch it the whole thing with my full attention, so I'm going to include that on this list. So yeah. Uh, All right, so now we're going to switch over to the movies that we're talking about this week. But let me talk a little bit more about the ones I have seen. Psycho, of course, is an iconic horror movie. There's not much around it. It's not my favorite of Hitchcock so far, but there's no denying that the shower, like just talking about the shower scene, the icon, like how iconic the images are of the shower scene, and just Bates Motel and all the things about Psycho. Even if I mean, most people learn about what happens before they see Psycho, unfortunately, and I also did, but it's still such a great twist within that movie. So Psycho is definitely like one of his most highly rated movies for a reason. Then let's see, North by Northwest was actually the movie I saw of his first, and it's been a long time since I've seen it. But again, this is one of those movies that has really iconic set pieces. Of course, you have the kind of like the finale on Mount Rushmore, but also the crop duster plane scene is a big one, and Cary Grant's really great in this movie. The suspense is very well built throughout the whole movie, and I just kind of love the adventure, the kind of tense adventure that he goes on within it. um, so Rear Window also is one of his best movies. It's I think The Birds I like slightly better, but Rear Window is undeniably great movie. Just the cinematography of Jimmy Stewart looking out his window at the rest of his apartment complex, and just the great attention to detail that they show in this movie, and the plotting and how it's written and how it progresses. There's so much great stuff about Rear Window. And then the birds. I really love the birds. What I love most about the birds is how it's this like very typical like Hollywood rom-com in the first half, and it's smashed together with a creature feature like horror movie in the back half, and I think that's really fun. um, Vertigo is another one of his that's very highly talked about. It wasn't as much for me. I was just too dizzy and confused by the end. I was able to follow it because it's not like it tries to trick you exactly, but by the time they get to the reveals and whatnot in that movie, like my head just hurts a little bit from trying to hold on and pay attention. Um, there's a lot of good suspense in that movie, but um, I, I'm kind of left not quite knowing what's going on for too long, I guess, and it just isn't quite. Mm, I didn't have as much fun watching that one, I guess, is what it boils down to. All right, but now we're going to move on to the ones I haven't seen yet. So the first one we're going to talk about is The Lodger. When I so One of the coolest things about Alfred Hitchcock is that he has such a long career that goes all the way from the silent era in the 20s, uh, all the way up until the 70s. He was making films. It's a massive filmography. And especially since he did work in the silent film era, I was excited to kind of learn that there was one of them that was particularly well received and fairly reputable as far as his movies. And it's The Lodger, A Story of the London Fog. Um, and I really enjoyed this movie. So The Lodger tells the story of how London was being preyed upon every Tuesday night by a serial killer who calls himself the Avenger and mainly kills blonde showgirls. Which this was a pretty weird experience because I was watching this on a Tuesday night and the murders occur on a Tuesday night. So it was a little bit too meta for me, a little bit odd coincidence, but it was kind of fun also. So the only description anyone has of this killer is that he is a man with a long coat and a hat who covers the lower half of his face with a scarf or mask of some kind. Then at the same time, we are introduced to a family who runs a flat with a blonde-haired showgirl daughter, and a mysterious new lodger decides to rent the spare room, appearing in the entryway covering the lower half of his face. There is also a policeman tenant or family friend who is on the Avenger case. Um, as these characters interact and more murders occur, the question is whether or not this man could possibly be the Avenger, or if he's just some random stranger. This premise and plotting is where the movie is brilliant. I really love Hitchcock's attention to detail on what different characters' perspectives are and how it could lead them to think certain things at certain times. Meanwhile, if you think you have a good sense of where the movie is going, you also have a suspicion that maybe you're wrong, much like the characters themselves have in the movie. The script constantly plays with coincidences and paranoia, while the camera expertly focuses on many details and characters' reactions and silhouettes or even footsteps. Okay. Ivar Novello, who plays the lodger, gives such a great silent film performance, always carrying this air of mystery and awkwardness, and yet glimmers of possibly a kind, misunderstood soul there. Okay, Malcolm Keane here on the right. He plays the cop. He does a good job as this asshole cop character who is incredibly rude to this man, but also grossly possessive of Daisy and wants to marry her. And I don't know, it's a weird kind of relationship they have. I don't know if she's actually into him or if he just is into her and wants to be married to her, and everybody's, I don't know. It's that part's strange, but it's okay because it kind of makes this character less likable, and it's sort of important that he is. And then Mary Alt in the foreground of this shot. She is Daisy's mother and the renter, along with her husband. She does a really great job in a couple of key scenes in particular that raises the mystery earlier on, but also raises the tension later in the plot when possible misunderstandings or truths are coming out or whatever. But kind of like her perspective of things is really important to kind of create suspense and mystery and tension. Yeah, so I don't want to spoil where this goes, but I really love the climax. What I will say is I was happy that it didn't end in utter tragedy one way or another. Given the twisted stories Hitchcock has put to screen, I thought there would be a darker conclusion. Uh, and just in a serial killer movie in general, I found myself worried for something I was not expecting to be worried for. Um, especially when Daisy is a blonde hair showgirl, and potentially could be a victim of this Avenger character. I was, you know, I don't know. There was different things that I was expecting to be afraid of instead of something else. Anyway, I think the aesthetic and screenplay and acting from Ivor Novello make for an intriguing silent film. I have very little experience with this era, but I have liked what I've seen so far. The Lodger is definitely a film you should check out from Hitchcock if you haven't already. I give this 3.5 stars and a like. Okay, so continuing with release order, the 39 Steps was the next on my list. Unfortunately, there isn't a ton I have to say for this movie because it gripped me in the first half, but has a really annoying plot device of handcuffing two of the main characters together in the back half. A large chunk of at least of the back half with icky interactions between the two of them, and I don't really think they have very good chemistry ever. um, the 39 Steps is basically a long spy intrigue chase thriller. Okay, so this tells the story of a Canadian tourist who gets caught up with with a spy who is trying to prevent a British secret from getting out of the country. And then she is murdered in his apartment, which leaves him with one way out to keep running away from cops and try to prevent what she was trying to prevent so he could clear his name. The dynamics of the chase in the first half work really well, and actually, like, the chase elements work all the way through, but unfortunately, um, there's some extra baggage, almost literally, um, in the second half. But I also rather like how well this random guy can improvise and escape capture during the first half. Um, I rather like our main protagonist, but he has an initial encounter with another woman on a train, which is uncomfortable, and then they are stuck together, as I said, with handcuffs later on in the movie, and it's even more uncomfortable then as well. Their dynamic as written is bad, and how they treat each other is also bad. But they also don't have very good chemistry. Just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about with chemistry, there is a Scottish woman who is the wife to an overbearing farmer husband character that our main character has much better chemistry with, and I would have much rather had seen some sort of adulterous affair slash stealing her away sort of plot line instead of him hanging out with this woman. Anyway, the plot continues to devolve. You are stuck with this pair together instead of just him trying to get out of stickier situations alone. The 39 Steps has some things going for it, but a lot that weakens it in the second half. I would actually say you could probably skip this Hitchcock film if you're trying to build your own essential Hitchcock list. I am going to give it a little bit more credit than it sounds like I'm giving it. I'm going to give it 3 stars, but I do not give it a like. I think there are elements in this that are worthy of kind of that, I don't know, extra half star or whatever, because this potentially could be like a 2.5 dislike movie for me. But I think there are some really cool things they do with the chase within this movie and building tension. It's just undercut a lot. All right, so the next helping of Hitchcock is 1940's Rebecca. Rebecca has been a staple on my main real regrets to remedy list from near the very beginning of making it. I am not totally unfamiliar with this story prior, since there have been other adaptations and the plot and characters have been discussed a lot in film conversations. Like, it's hard to you can't really avoid it. But it was time for me to finally watch this Alfred Hitchcock classic. I am pleased to say I enjoyed Rebecca a lot. The first two acts of this movie are so well constructed, and you really feel for this new Mrs. De Winter. Um, I call her the new Mrs. De Winter because she actually doesn't have a character name other than Mrs. De Winter, but of course the titular character Rebecca was the former Mrs. De Winter who passed away. So I feel like I have to like distinguish the two beyond calling them Rebecca versus Mrs. De Winter. Anyway, I'll move on from that. Anyway, I really feel for this new Mrs. De Winter and trying to be a great basically her trying to be a great lady, but also to fill the shoes of the magnificent, renowned late wife of Max de Winter named Rebecca. Um, there is a tension that builds before anything of true implications even happen, but it feels as dreadful as someone being stalked by a killer. There are elements of the third act that I think get too caught up in conspiracy, blackmail, and other intrigue that is far less interesting than everyone being haunted by Rebecca's memory. And really it just feels like a completely different movie. However, I love the ultimate ending for Manderley. Okay. For those unfamiliar, Rebecca is about a young lady's companion who meets the widower Maxim de Winter in Monte Carlo and they fall in love. While there seems to be a lingering memory of his late wife, the two decide to get married and continue a life together at his Manderley estate in Cornwall. I really like how you slowly learn more and more about Max and what happened to Rebecca in here. But also how their courtship is oddly affected by those things. The best act is when the new Mrs. De Winter finally gets to Manderley. Manderley scene here, and she kind of enters the foyer, and she is surrounded and constantly reminded by the memory of Rebecca like a ghost. There is so much pressure for this girl from a simple background to be thrust into the role of a great English lady and fill the shoes of someone everyone seemed to idolize. Joan Fontaine really captures this innocence, this insecurity of this young woman and how she is more and more affected by those expectations. Plus, she's not helped at all by the housemaid, Mrs. Danvers, who absolutely adored Rebecca and is constantly reminding the new Mrs. De Winter about what Rebecca was like and how she would do things if she was still alive or running the house. And also, if that's not enough, everything is embroidered with a script letter R marking the late Mrs. De Winter's territory of sorts. So Rebecca's insignia is really everywhere in the house. So even if she could try to get away from it, there's always these little reminders everywhere. I also really enjoy Laurence Olivier as Max De Winter. He was reminding me of how Cary Elwes carries himself, despite this not being a comedic performance whatsoever. However, it's more likely that the reason is Elwes probably modeled things after Olivier and actors like him. So anyway, but I was really kind of like comparing those two for some reason while I was watching this. I like how mysterious he is about what he'll share about Rebecca, but also the way he is haunted about being reminded of her. He is often aloof, yet tries to ease his new wife's self-doubt at the same time. His reveal scene leading into the final act is an amazing scene as well. One of the best of the movie. But honestly, the character that receives the most attention in any adaptation of this story is Mrs. Danvers. Judith Anderson plays a truly intimidating and sometimes creepy demeanor whenever she's on screen. She is a lot of scenes where she really shows this off, but especially in this scene with where she first gives the new Mrs. Danvers the tour of the West Wing bedroom, which was Rebecca's bedroom when she was still alive, and it's just this really like haunting, like creepy, like intimidating kind of encounter as she's like showing her where her how she kept her things at her vanity and all this different stuff. Um, but yeah, Mrs. Danvers is definitely quite the figure. Anyway, the way Mrs. Danvers manipulates and tricks the new Mrs. De Winter is so conniving, but the calmness and coldness with which she does it is what makes it even more cruel. Plus, she really closes out the film in an epic way. I can understand why Rebecca is so highly acclaimed among Hitchcock's filmography. I love the atmosphere of this movie and how both Max and Mrs. De Winter are affected by Rebecca even after she's dead. I definitely would place this in the league with the likes of, Vertigo, Rear Window, The Birds, and Psycho that people praise so much. I think I might even consider it in my top 4 or 5 Hitchcock, even though I still have not really not covered enough of his movies to really do a sort of ranking of that yet. But I give this 4 stars out of 5, and I give it a like. All right, the next helping of Hitchcock that I have for tonight, and the last one for tonight, is Foreign Correspondent, also from 1940. Foreign Correspondent has a similar DNA to the 39 Steps by relying heavily on a romantic pair developing in the middle of international espionage, and in this case, pre-World War II peace efforts. This also means that there are some really weak script elements, particularly in the development of character relationships, but also in choices of a few characters that forces this relationship to being even more prominent because of the political intrigue and danger. Okay, so Foreign Correspondent follows a crime reporter who is recruited to be a foreign correspondent instead of a crime reporter because the newspaper editor is unhappy with the reporting style of their current foreign correspondents because they don't really seem to know how to go after a story, and particularly they don't know how to find like the very criminal elements that must be going on in Europe pre-World War II kind of whatever, and he wants somebody who can sniff those things out, but also someone who doesn't have a ton of preconceived notions about what the politics of Europe are, and so he can really kind of come in with a very blank slate as far as what he should be looking for and what he should be tracking down. But he isn't so basic but of course, he is an amateur to the sphere and quickly finds himself in the middle of an assassination plot of an important diplomat while also building relationships with the leader of a peace organization on the right and his daughter, who's seen on the left here. There are great scenes here of him trying to follow the case, especially one inside a Dutch windmill, while also trying to avoid harm coming his way. And there are a lot of clever twists and turns. I actually really like John Jones and Carol Fisher's chemistry in these roles, but the relationship is very rushed, and I don't think it ever needed to be a romantic relationship for it to be a good team up. They had really good chemistry and like just interacting and being a good team and kind of trying to work together with similar gains, especially when they also teamed up with uh, Folio. His name is Folio in this movie. He's a British reporter who is on a similar case. And when the three of these people are together and kind of planning together, I really enjoy their dynamic. But anyway, as I mentioned, they take a particular detour to make them falling in love even more at the crux of the story. I mean, even look at this poster. It says he wanted his story, she wanted love. So you can see that there is this driving force to try to make this relationship much more of a plot point than it probably should have been, or at least in my opinion, it should have been. So a movie that has a lot of promise feels rather cheap through the middle, even though it does stick the crash landing, so to speak, in the conclusion. Um, yeah, so I do give this a like, but it's another 3-star movie, and I give it a like. So there are some weaker elements, but there is a lot that of really cool scenes that make up for some of the weaker developments. And while the romance is annoying, I think they're better at interacting with each other than at least the 39 Steps that duo was. Plus, Carol Fisher is a much, much, much stronger character in general in this movie than in the 39 Steps. All right, so that covers all the movies for this week's episode of Letterboxing with Commentatoring Nerd. Next week, we're going to have some more hefty helpings of Hitchcock, the second course. And I probably will have a couple new releases as well. I at least plan to see The Menu, which is coming out, and I really want to be able to see that and talk to you guys about that, at least briefly, to give you a sense of whether to see it or not. But otherwise, we're going to talk a lot more about uh, the master of film noir, I guess you might call it, Alfred Hitchcock. Talk more about his movies later next week. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I hope you tune into the next episode of Letterboxing with Commentating Nerd. Have a great rest of your weeks, and have your own great, amazing movie journeys in the meantime.